Recently, the new Drukhari Codex was released for Warhammer 40k, so let's go through it and pick out the top 7 best units in the Codex. Also some honorable mentions. Let's get into it. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about the best units in the brand new 9th edition Drukhari Codex. I will be combining a couple profiles that I think are very similar, so that I'm not talking about too many basically identical units that fulfill the same role. There's also some wonky points values in the Drukhari Codex. As of recording this video, you could be paying some real low points for some real good models, and I'm going to be assuming that those get eroded to be a rational number. I think the biggest one is Reaver jet bikes. In the Codex, they're 10 points. They were changed in MFM, and I imagine we'll see another change in MFM to match those 2 points costs in the not-too-distant future. Right now, that's not the case. I think it'll be changed pretty shortly, though, so I'm going to assume that that's how it is. If it doesn't get changed, just assume that I said Reaver jet bikes were on this list at 10 points a model. We are still very early in the life cycle of the Codex, and not a lot of play has been conducted with it. All the builds aren't quite sussed out yet, so this is very early days for the best units in the Codex. But I think it's a pretty decent list. I'm sure it'll change a little bit in the future, though, and a month from now, people are going to be coming back to this video being like, "You idiot! You big dummy! How come you forgot grotesques?" Or something. I don't know. Anyway, let's get into it. With number 7, let's talk about Hellions. Hellions got a ridiculous glow up from their 8th edition profile. They got an extra wound, which is crazy. They are the jet bike keyword, which is pretty useful to have as well. And they get access to the eviscerating flyby stratagem, which deals mortal wounds on units that they fly over. Previously, it was restricted just to Reaver jet bikes, but Hellions getting access to it and being more efficient than Reaver jet bikes, assuming that, again, those jet bikes aren't at their 10-point cost, means that these guys are going to be the premier users of eviscerating flyby. They also have pretty insane melee damage output. They have those sweet glaives for 2 damage each, which is solid. They have a gun, which is good at shooting. They have pretty good threat range with advancing and charging. If you could imagine like a Harlequin Skyweaver, a unit that sees an immense amount of play, that trades a little bit of shooting for being like less than half the cost, that's basically what a Hellion is. Number 6, an interesting one, the Void Raven Bomber. This one might be a little bit of a hot take, because the Void Raven isn't particularly efficient in its shooting output. It only has a couple Dark Lances unless you upgrade it for its missile launchers, in which case it gets pretty expensive. But holy crap, is the Void Mine ability a ridiculous threat range. A 6-inch radius on an explosion that deals D6, not D3, D6 mortal wounds on a 4+ to everything that it hits. What the heck? That's ridiculous. With the new FAQ that units that fly off the table can still use abilities that trigger after they fly over something, it's literally impossible to stop this. I think were this in the 8th edition rules, I would say, you could probably just screen out the Void Mine hitting your most important or squishiest stuff, and it's not that big of a deal. But now you can't. You actually just can't, because the bomber will just fly directly over your army, pick wherever is good to drop the mine off, and blow up your army with a bunch of D6 mortal wounds. I think even if the Void Mine itself, it being very dicey, isn't reliable by any stretch of the imagination, but your opponent also has to worry that it could just blow up all their characters, and that forces them into a position where they have to deploy with the threat of that Void Mine if you go first in mind. And if the Drukhari player ends up going first and just runs that Void Raven over their army, and they have deployed, very concentrated to get out of line of sight of all your Dark Lances or something, that Void Mine could do a ton of damage. But if they don't, if they spread out to try to mitigate the effects of the mine, then you just shoot them on turn 1. It's an insane threat, and although it's very expensive, that's forcing it to the bottom of the list. I think we're going to see a lot of lists with these in it, just for that Alpha Strike potential. And, I mean, once it comes in later at Deep Strikes, it shoots a couple Dark Lances at people. It's not bad after it drops that mine, but that mine is a ridiculous threat. Also, like, non-zero chance to just kill characters. A 5-wound character just straight up dies 1 out of 9 times every time you drop a Void Mine on it, since it's a 1 in 3 to hit it and a 1 in 3 to kill it. And even if you just damage it a whole bunch, that means that you can't play very aggressively with those characters for the rest of the game. Number 5, we'll start talking about some troops options here, which I think are some of the most important data sheets in the Drukhari Codex. Let's talk about Racks. Racks were really terrifying to everyone just before this book came out, because you still had access to Dark Cornucopians. Not so much anymore. But Racks coming in at only 8 points a model with a maximum squad size of 20 for a relatively resilient OBSEC troop model is pretty decent. Combo that with the fact that you can spam the crap out of liquefiers on these units. Taking just a bunch of 5-man rack squads gives you the maximum number of liquefiers possible. You get 2 liquefiers for each 5-man rack squad, and you get to make use of that incredible Dark Technomancer's combo with liquefiers. The combo being that you can just declare your Dark Technomancer's activation with a liquefier for +1 to wound and +1 damage on that weapon. The downside of Dark Technomancers, obviously, is that hit rolls of 1 deal mortal wounds to yourself, and you can't reroll your hit rolls. Fortunately for these guys, that doesn't matter if you're using a liquefier, which hits automatically. So there's no hit roll to wound yourself on. You just get a straight bonus during your shooting phase. Really good shooting profile for these guys. Plus, they're not too easy to kill. They're very cheap. You can get a whole bunch of them. You can put them in whatever transports you want. Just an excellent troops option if you're looking for something to sit on the midboard of the table. Do a little bit of damage, tickle some people with those 2 damage +1 to wound flamethrower attacks, but just generally fill out your troop slotman very efficiently. Moving on to number 4, let's start talking about some characters. We have the Archon, and with the new Master Archon upgrade, this guy turned from being a relatively boring, sort of mundane support option to being an incredible smash character. You can give him Eternal Hatred for full rerolls to wound, you can give him the Jin Blade for 3 damage, and you can upgrade him to that Master Archon upgrade to double fight once per game. Puts out a ridiculous number of 3 damage attacks with those rerolls, an insane damage output from this individual character. And one theme that I think we're going to be seeing in Drukhari going into the future is that their smash characters are excellent, and the Archon is one of them. Beyond that, you can still just play Archons as a support piece. In a real space raid detachment, they give you those rerolls on basically the entire detachment, reroll once to hit, and they just also give you like Kabalite Trueborn or something, reroll once to hit as well. Pretty good, significantly less useful now that it doesn't work on your big tanks, your big Ravagers and stuff that don't have that core keyword, but still pretty nice to have. Number 3, a little more Smash characters, I think. We're going to talk about Incubi, and I'm also going to roll Drazhar into this entry as well, because they both sort of fill the same role. They're both Incubi. They kind of do the same thing. They're a big, punchy counterattack unit. They aren't a ridiculously long threat range. They aren't going to be a unit that you throw up in the middle and expect to sink into your opponent for an alpha strike and do a bunch of damage, because they don't threat far enough for that to really matter. But what they do is sit in a dedicated transport in your deployment zone and act as a threat of a superlative counterpunch to anything that engages you in the center of the table. They have a reasonable threat range, especially on turn 2 with Advance and Charge out of those transports with the Power from Pain ability. And they can just basically kill whatever they touch, especially with Drazhar buffing up your Incubi with +1 to wound. If you give Drazhar his own Warlord trait himself, he can be full rerolls to wound with a million attacks. And it's just good. He's just great. Also, the Tormentor ability on Drazhar is awesome now. You have the potential to stop your opponents from being able to interrupt you, which means that Drazhar automatically gets his 2 fight activations when he charges, which is really good. And keeping in the theme of those Smash characters, I think one of the strengths of Drukhari is that they're going to be very good at punishing armies that commit into them and come fight them on their terms, because units like Incubi and units like Drazhar are going to be able to pop out and just blow those things up really easily. Very fire and forget missile. I love these guys. I think they're going to be really awesome. I don't think it's worth sort of building your entire army around Incubi. I don't think they're that good, but as a concentrated unit where you can really focus a lot of damage output in one area of the table and really punish your opponent for fighting over objectives, Incubi are going to be awesome for that. Now, let's go to number 2. And this one, I'm also going to roll 2 data sheets down into one. And honestly, the only reason I didn't put these 2 data sheets at number 1 on the list is because I think it's, I don't know, just kind of boring. But holy crap, are Drukhari dedicated transports incredible. The Venom is basically just a Star Weaver. It's -1 invulnerable save. That's too bad. And it doesn't have as good shooting, but its melee is better. And it's just 20 points less. You just save 20 points on a dedicated transport, and everyone who fights against Star Weavers know how ridiculously difficult they are to kill. Venoms are going to be basically that same thing, but more efficient. And it's so small, you can just hide it places. But really, I think the standout that no one saw coming in this codex were Raiders. What the heck is the points value on the Raider looking at right now? 85 points for a big Darklands that can also transport a bunch of dudes more efficiently. Much easier to kill, I guess, per point than the Venom is, because it's larger and it doesn't have that built-in -1 to be hit. But in your dedicated transport slots, you get to put heavy support level weaponry, and that's phenomenal. Most Drukhari lists are going to want to basically fit their entire list into dedicated transports, a lot like other Eldari subfactions, and I think that's very appropriate for Drukhari, but I also think In service of that theme, they've pushed these dedicated transports super hard, and you can really tell. Raiders look so powerful. Venoms also look great, and both of them are really cheap for what they do. You're going to be seeing a lot of Raiders and Venoms on the table, so I think going into the future, no more of these ground-poundy, homunculus-based Drukhari lists. We're going to see the fast and furious dedicated transport lists jumping out, and it's going to be super cool. You can also supplement that efficiency, especially on Raiders, with a lot of the sub-faction abilities. Stuff like Cabal of the Black Heart for the reroll to hit, or the Cabal of the Obsidian Rose for the reroll to wound, especially if you're shooting that one super high-value Dark Lance shot. Getting that single reroll in there, that Salamander-style reroll, is super important. You can also just, like, put it in Homunculus Coverings and take Dark Technomancers and buff it up with +1 damage and +1 to wound. Again, that's great, and there's even further synergy because you don't have to be in the same sub-faction to transport models of another sub-faction. So you can take your transports in whatever sub-faction benefits their ranged attacks or their defensive capabilities the best, and then just put whatever you want into them. It's so flexible, it's so powerful, and they're so points efficient. These units are going to be incredible. Now, before we move on, let's talk about some honorable mentions. Some stuff that didn't quite make the cut, but that I do think you're going to see in a lot of lists. First up, let's talk about witches. I don't know if I'm totally sold on witches. They do a lot of damage now. They have 1 billion attacks, but it's like strength 3, and you can buff them with stratagems and stuff like that to deal a lot of damage, and especially with the Hecatrix Blood Bride upgrade for +1 to hit, and the buff on their rending ability, I think they're going to be able to deal a reasonable amount of damage. Plus, their special weapons are pretty good. It requires kind of a lot of work to make witches do well, and they're less efficient per model than any of the other troops options, and they aren't particularly harder to kill. They're only a 6-up invulnerable save against ranged attacks. In melee, they're obviously better, but a lot of times you're just going to, charge something, and they're either going to desperate breakout, or you're just going to kill them, and then they'll shoot your unit to death. And you're like, well, great. That was very exciting. I don't think witches are bad, for sure, and I think a lot of lists are going to be benefited from having a couple units of witches, but I don't know if they're really good enough to be the mainstay of your army. Kind of a similar thing for Kabalite warriors. I think specifically with the Kabalite Trueborn upgrade, these guys go absolutely through the roof. They get +1 ballistic skill, ignore all modifiers to hit, so you can move and shoot heavy weapons for free. And they're just hitting on 2s, probably rerolling 1s with an Archon nearby with those big heavy weapons like Dark Lances and Blasters and stuff like that. Super awesome. They do a bunch of damage. They're a very scary unit. They are a little bit expensive for what you get because, again, they're not that difficult to kill. But, I mean, you kind of know what you're signing up for when you're playing Drukhari. You're like, my guys are going to die. It's okay. Next up for honorable mentions, Mandrakes. They are, I think, one of the premier utility units in the game. They're a little expensive. 75 points a unit is a lot for a unit that you're not expecting to do much damage, but for screening purposes and for deploying scramblers, I can't think of many better units in the game than Mandrakes. And one of the reasons for that is their unique reserve ability. First off, From Out the Shadows, you can scout deploy them, so deploy them up in the front of your army 9 inches away from enemy models. And in some matchups, that actually just becomes crucial, and that just kind of wins you the game. Like if you win the deployment roll against a Raven Guard army, for example, and you have a unit of Mandrakes in your list, as long as you're okay with just giving that unit up, which, I mean, it's like a 75-point unit of 5 guys, you don't really care about that anyway. You're not expecting them to be the the mainstay of your army. You can throw them up in front of your army, and you can block off a lot of your opponent's avenues to move up the table. Same thing for a faction like Orcs or Necrons that's gonna deep strike on you turn 1. They are excellent screeners for that. Even better, because they have Fade Away, instead of any normal reserve ability, you don't have to declare them as reserves at the start of the game. Instead, they start on the table. They're -1 to be hit, and you can just put them like along the back edge of your table. They can screen out your back lines. A lot of your army's going to be moving forward aggressively because you're playing Drukhari, and you won't have too much stuff to sit on back objectives and to screen out your deployment zone. Even in that capacity, they're not super easy to kill because of that -1 and that invulnerable save. Then using Fade Away, you can just pick them up on round 4 and deploy them in your opponent's deployment zone to deploy scramblers or engage on fronts or a line breaker or any of those maneuver-style secondaries, and there's basically nothing your opponent can do to stop it. In most factions, if you just screen out your own deployment zone through round 3, they won't be able to get their deploy scramblers completed. And Mandrakes do not have that problem. Mandrakes are just going to be chilling in the back and being like, it's fine, we'll just wait till turn 5, dude, when your whole army's dead because we've killed it with our sweet smash characters. Very few armies in the game can screen out their deployment zone throughout the entire game, and that's what you have to do to deny scramblers for Mandrakes. I Love this unit. I think you should probably always be putting one into your list just to open the possibility of that secondary. And in addition, they also give you that additional utility of being able to screen really well and screen alpha strikers like Raven Guard really well, who are sort of becoming a little bit more popular in the metagame right now. So love these guys. Also, they have a sweet gun. They're not too bad in melee. I just think there's almost no downside to mandrakes besides that kind of high point cost. Okay, one last honorable mention before we move on to the number one best unit, in my opinion, in the Drukhari Codex, and that is a weird one, the Court of the Archon. This is such a bizarre unit entry. Previously, in the past version of the Codex, all of these were like the individual models that you would take one at a time, but now you take them in a big unit. You have to have at least 4 of them split up between the Lamian, the Medusae, the Slith, and the Urgul, but you can have up to 4 of each one. So you can have 1 of each, or you can have 4 of one, or you can have 2 of 2 different ones, and you can have up to 8 of them in the unit. They're just really hyper efficient, and that's it. The other downside of the unit is that you have to have an Archon in your list. In fairness, you probably will always have an Archon in your list, so that's not even that big of a downside. In addition, you can only have 1 per Archon that you have. They don't take any battlefield role slots, so that's pretty nice. Talking about the profiles of these models, they're so good, and for their points cost especially. The Urgul and the Lamian are only 16 points a model. Sliths come in at 18, Medusae at 22, so they are the priciest one. But for that points cost, you get some ridiculous stat blocks. Move 8 across the unit, base only toughness 3, but that's okay because each one of these models has 3 wounds. So your points per wound is like between 5 and 6 for the most part for this unit, which is right around where like guardsman level infantry are, except you also get some additional defensive benefits. Urguls and Slith have a 5+ damage ignore on top of that. And they just have a billion attacks coming in at 3, 4, potentially 6 attacks if you're running Urguls in the unit. With pretty decent melee profiles, Slith and Urguls have an AP value, 1 or 2. Slith come in at strength 5 even. Slith also have shard carbines for 3 poison shots apiece. Medusae have an AP 2 flamer pistol weapon. So just from an efficiency standpoint, this unit is incredibly powerful. It's a bunch of wounds. It's relatively hard to chew through. It does reasonable damage, especially if you're just thrustering infantry. There's just no way to go wrong. I can see almost every list, including a Court of the Archon unit, assuming that you're putting a Smash Archon in your list. They're just super solid. For sub 100 points, you get a bunch of wounds to throw on an objective. Sweet. Sounds good. Sign me up. I'm in. All right, and that brings us to number 1. The best unit, I think, in the Drukhari Codex, and that is the Succubus. Unlike her 8th edition profile, the Succubus now is one of 40k's preeminent Smash characters, as it should be. She's going to be up in that transport. She's going to be hopping out in the first wave of attacks, and she's going to be showing all of her brothers and sisters and just cutting dudes apart. You can build a bunch of different really powerful Smash Succubi in your list, and I think that's one of the most important things about them. Unlike most other Smash characters in the game, where you take the Imperium Sword and the Teeth of Terra, or you take the Righteous Rage and Beneficence, and those are the combos that build that Smash character, and you're locked into one of them, as long as you will have the CP to spend, which for the most part you will, because a lot of Drukhari lists are going to be starting with 14 CP, which is an immense amount. You can build even 2 or 3 Smash Succubi into your list, all of whom are dangerous, especially to sort of a mid-range OBSEC unit that's going to be in the center of the table, and all of whom your opponent has to be worried about. This character is one of the reasons that Drukhari lists are going to be so difficult to engage profitably into, because even if you get rid of the transports and you get rid of the troops units inside, you get rid of the big Kronos and the Talos and these random monsters that are hanging out, there's still going to be these obnoxious characters hiding with Lookout Sir in your opponent's army, and they're going to be able to counterattack and really punish you for killing your army. And the Succubus is sort of spearheading that archetype of character. I think Succubi are great. They're not very expensive. They also have no retreat, so sometimes they can mech up your opponent's plans if they can't get away from them, and you can even sometimes grab multiple turns of swinging with the Succubus. I am super excited to see all of the really interesting and cool Succubus builds that are coming out of the Drukhari Codex, and it's going to be awesome. Overall, super sweet Codex. It looks like with this Codex, GW is certainly maintaining their good track record of reasonably balanced Codex in 9th edition. There's not really anything bad in the Drukhari Codex. don't know if I would take grotesques, but like there's still a build for grotesques. You can put liquefiers on them. You can use the Dark Technomancer combo. You can put them in a transport and deep strike it. You can do a lot of stuff with that random unit. And that's the case for every single unit. I think there's some real sleeper hits. I think a lot of the special characters are also really good. There's certainly some play with the big heavy vehicles, and I think we're going to maybe see some Tantalus builds coming out as well. Basically everything in the faction is blasted wide open by this codex. And this list was really hard to make. And I'm sure it's going to change pretty rapidly as we get further in with testing these new builds, because man, this faction is made of like nothing but slam dunks. That said, nothing in it looks particularly broken to me. It looks like a very fragile faction. Almost everything in it is easy to kill, but it hits so hard. It's like playing against Harlequins, but unlike Harlequins, when you move up to engage them and start killing them, instead of just hoping they roll invulnerable saves and dying, they just kill you right back. They just charge you with a billion smash characters and all these really powerful melee units and shoot you with these dark lances, and you just die, and it's so good. Anyway, super excited for Drukhari builds coming out. And if you have any units that you're super excited about that you thought I missed in this video, throw them down in the comments down below. Also, drop a like, subscribe, all that stuff. You know, it's the YouTube stuff. You know, the YouTube drill. And before we close out here, big thanks to my patrons over patreon.com/TacticalTortoise and YouTube channel members that you can join in the link down below the video. I have a new series, an advanced tactics series that are coming out for patrons and channel members that has the first 2 episodes out already, and we're going to be having more coming out this week. So if you want to get really stuck into some really deep dives on 40k tactics, that's going to be the place to do it. I also want to throw another big thank you to my patrons and my supporters, and also everyone who's subscribed. I had some contract work come up over the last week or so, and I wasn't able to do much content, streaming, or videos, and I really want to thank everyone sort of for maintaining their support over that little bit of a content drought. But this week I should be back on it, and so expect some more videos from me over the next couple days. So it's going to be great, and thanks for watching, everybody, all the way to the end. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.